Thanks very much, everybody. It's great to be here, and a real privilege and honour for me to be asked to come down here today. So I suppose I always like to thank people in advance in case in my hurry to get off the stage I forget to thank people before I go. So thanks to David there. First of all, David contacted me initially to come down here, and then I got a phone call from Rosemary. I think, Rosemary, your call to me was probably the closest I've ever got to a dirty phone call. Because when she phoned me, she says, is this Richard Moore? And I said, yes. And she says, well, my heart is beating in an irregular way or something like that. So I never had that impact on a woman in my life, Rosemary. So thanks very much for that. So I was definitely not going to miss today. And I also thank Finbar for all his work as well in making my visit here comfortable. And of course, Ursula, my colleague from Children in Crossfire, that brought me down here today and puts up with me and trips like this here. And not forgetting, I met a colleague of mine who used to work for Children in Crossfire, Grania O'Neill as well. And thanks to you for the time that you're going to give me. I suppose, as you can realise, my story begins in 1972 when I was a 10-year-old boy in Derry. I grew up in the Craigan Estate in Derry, and the Craigan Estate in the 70s was, I suppose, in the grip of its most violent period, and what's become known as the most violent period and year in the history of the Troubles, because Bloody Sunday happened in January 1972, and the months and years they followed Bloody Sunday throughout Northern Ireland, and particularly in Derry, was probably among the most violent time, and many people were killed and maimed in the months to follow Bloody Sunday. In my estate, there were about, I would say, most of the people that were shot dead on Bloody Sunday lived there. 30 seconds walk from my house, in either direction, you would have been close to 3 or 4 or 5 of the families who were affected by Bloody Sunday. My own uncle, Gerard, was shot dead on Bloody Sunday as well, so it came right into our home. I went to Rosemount Primary School, and Rosemount Primary School was on the edge of the Craigan Estate, as was St. Joseph's Secondary School, and the two schools were beside each other. Also beside the schools was an RUC police barracks. And because the police barracks was on the edge of the Craigan Estate, then, as you can imagine, it was very much a target for the IRA and a target for riots on a daily basis. The British Army were brought in to protect that barracks, and they built these sandbag huts, semi-permanent military installations. One of these huts faced up in between my school, Rosemount Primary School, and St. Joseph's Secondary School. So, on the 4th of May 1972, as normal, I got out of school and I ran up through the football pitch of St. Joseph's School. And as I ran along the bottom of the football pitch, I had to pass this army hut. And from inside the hut, a British soldier fired a rubber bullet. It struck me here in the bridge of the nose. I lost this eye and was left completely blind in my left eye. So I've been blind now, 38, 39 years. I suppose from an incident like that, you could say the only way is up. And I have to say that I responded very well to being shot and losing my eyesight in such a traumatic way. About a month after I was shot, my brother Noel took me for a walk up and down out our back garden. And he said to me, Richard, do you know what has happened to you? And I said, yes, I knew I was shot. And he said, do you know what damage was done? And I said, no. And that's when he told me that I would be blind for the rest of my life. And I have to say, I accepted it like that. I literally took it in my stride. I only remember crying once about being blind, and that was that night when I went to bed. And I was in bed on my own, and I cried because I realized for the first time that I was never going to actually see my parents again. And a 10-year-old boy, you don't think about your education. You don't think about how you're going to get about. You don't think about how you're going to cope. All as I felt was this enormous sense of loss, that I was never going to physically see my parents' faces again. And I cried myself to sleep that night. And the next day, I woke up, got out of bed, and began to put the pieces of my life back together. And I would always say, that day was the first day of the rest of my life as a blind person. I eventually went back to primary school, went back to the school that I was at, the Rosemary Primary School, and then went on to St. Joseph's Secondary School, the school that I was shot in. And I done my O-levels and my A-levels there, and went on to university, where I got my degree in 1983. I got married in 1984, got divorced in 1985. Don't be telling anybody. She doesn't know yet. But, I have two children, Niamh and Enya. Niamh is 22 now, and Enya is 19. And I've done a lot of things over the years, as you can imagine. I learned how to play the guitar and used to play in bands and stuff like that. I just want to say to Michael that the John Lennon song that he sang, Imagine, is my favourite song of all time. So I was delighted to hear that. And, I started a folk group with my wife in the Long Tower Chapel in Derry. So if you ever happen to be in Derry at 6 o'clock on a Saturday night, I'll be up there strumming away. And I was compensated for being shot. And with half the money I bought a house, and with the other half I bought a pub. And 2 years later I bought a second pub. So by the time I was 20 years of age, I owned two pubs with my brother in the centre of Derry. And when I come out of university, I went straight into running the business, and I've done that for about 14 years. There was other things I'd done, but the reason why I'm telling you all of that is because I wouldn't have bounced back the way I did or survived what happened if it hadn't been for a few things. The first thing is I come from a good family. The second thing is I come from a good community. And the third thing is that despite the difficulties that existed in Derry and the poverty that was there in those times, I still had choices and opportunities available to me. So when I was, during my self-employed life, I began to become aware that there were children in other parts of the world that might have had their eyesight, but didn't have what I had. Didn't have that family, didn't have that community, and didn't have that opportunity. So eventually I sold out the business and I set up an organization called Children in Crossfire. And Children in Crossfire today work in Tanzania and Ethiopia and the Gambia with children under 8 years of age in the area of health and education. And I'll not go into that too much, but for me, poverty is probably one of the most shameless affronts in our society today. To think that as I'm standing here talking to you, there are children in those countries and many other countries who are being mentally, physically, sexually abused in multiple ways every single day of their lives. And I remember reading the UN rights on the UN Convention on the Rights of Children. And I remember while I was reading them, and it's a fantastic set of articles to protect human beings throughout the world. And I remember thinking that the children that I've come in contact with in Ethiopia and Tanzania and Gambia may as well read the Derry Journal as read that, because it means the same to them in terms of how they are not being protected in the way that they should be, in the way that the articles lay out. So for me, poverty is not an issue of charity. It's an issue of justice. And until we deal with the injustice of poverty, then really we're not tackling that issue of poverty. I'm not the only person that suffered as a result of my blindness. My parents suffered enormously. My daddy and my mommy were two wonderful people. They went to Mass every day. They kept a very warm, caring, loving home. They weren't involved in politics in any way. They had 12 children that they tried to raise in the best way they could. But despite their best efforts of avoiding the troubles found them. And over a 4-month period, January to May, their world was turned upside down. And the troubles came right into our living room. And they were broken-hearted. I remember listening to my mommy at night, kneeling beside my bed when she thought I was sleeping after I got out of hospital. And she started saying her prayers. And she would plead to God that He would give me back my eyesight. And it broke down into a sob, and then it got worse. And then I used to pretend to wake up, and she'd pull herself together. My daddy, he stood in the street and cried when he came back from the hospital, when the doctors had told him that I would be blind for the rest of my life. And despite all of that, I never heard him say an angry word. I never heard him say an angry word. And for me, blindness, I'm a very happy and contented blind person. I always say there's a lot of pluses about being blind. For example, I don't have to look at you, lad, for starters. And I'm the best looking guy in here, and I defy you to prove different. But so blindness is, for me, an enjoyable experience. But that doesn't mean I don't miss my eyesight, and there are times in my life when I did. For example, when Niamh and Enya were born, I was there in the ward, and I would have given anything to see them. I would still give anything to see them. When they made their first communions and their confirmations, and they walked down the aisle of the Craigan Chapel where I done my first communion and confirmation, and their beautiful dresses, and everybody telling me how lovely they looked, and I couldn't see them. And I remember one day sitting in the Craigan Chapel, and I can't remember if it was Niamh or Enya was making her confirmation, and I remember thinking to myself, does the British soldier that blinded me ever think about me? Does he ever think about the impact of war? Does he ever think about the impact of his actions that day and the legacy of violence and what it has meant for me for the rest of my life? But I'm glad to say that I've never had a moment's anger either. And I always wanted to meet the British soldier. And about 30 odd years after I was shot, 2005, the BBC made a documentary about my story. And I told them at that time that I would like to meet the soldier. But I told many people over the years. I didn't even know his name. And in November 2005, the makers of the documentary rang me to tell me that they had found the soldier. And in January 2006, I flew to Scotland on my own and met Charles for the first time. And they sit at a table opposite the guy that pulled the trigger, that caused all that hurt to me and my family. And it blinded me for life. And to like him was an amazing experience. It was an amazing experience. Charles and me talked for 4 hours and 3/4. And I have to say that I have never had an experience like it in my life. And I learnt 2 things about forgiveness that day. And the Dalai Lama, who was mentioned there, often talks about this, but it registered with me that day. First and foremost, I learnt that forgiveness is a gift to yourself. And what I mean by that is, forget about Charles. Forget about him. It's what's important for me and here as I forgive Charles. For my peace of mind. For my happiness. So if Charles wants my forgiveness, he has it. But what's important is, for me, is I forgive him. The second thing I learned about forgiveness is that forgiveness won't change the past, but it will change the future. Again, the fact that I forgive Charles won't give me back my eyesight. It won't take away all those hurts that his action caused that day. But I believe the person that I am standing in front of you today, and the way in which I'm content with blindness, the way in which I've led my life, has come about as a direct result of that gift of forgiveness. So it won't change the past, but it'll change the future. Blindness is a very interesting experience. And often when I'm talking at events like this, I like to talk about some of the positive things about blindness. It's amazing. I'll tell you, I was in a village in Africa. I was trying to think where to start the story, really, but I was in a village in Africa, and I go out there many times, right? And one time when I was out in Malawi, I was out in this remote village in Malawi, and sometimes I get this moment in my life where I actually visualize things. And that was one of them. And I seen this situation. There I was, this white guy, standing in a village, surrounded with black people. And I was thinking how odd it looked. And the children were coming up and touching my hand. I thought they were coming up being friendly, but somebody told me afterwards they thought the white would come off. But you know, I just realized that how much prejudice exists on this planet based on the color of somebody's skin, based on how you see somebody. If you don't like the look of them, if they're not wearing the right clothes, if their hair color is different. How often have we judged people based on things like that? In Northern Ireland, when you see somebody in a school uniform, you make a judgment about that. You know their religion. So you make a judgment about that person based on the school uniform they're wearing. And of course, the amount of prejudice that exists and racism that exists simply on the basis of the colour of somebody's skin. So what I would always say in relation to blindness, you know, if the whole world was blind, there'd be no racism on the basis of the colour of somebody's skin. And that's an amazing thing to say. Something as simple as eyesight, or the lack of it, could change that. I'll finish with a story about my mammy, because as you know, she was a very powerful woman, and my daddy was as well. But my daddy died 5 years after I was shot. My mammy's still alive. She's 92 years of age now, and as sharp as a pin. And, you know, when I got out of hospital, I used to wear a wee vest. And pinned across this vest here, my mammy had every holy medal that you could think of. And I mean every holy medal. There was about 40 holy medals. When I walked, I rattled. And people used to come in, you know, the way it was in the Craig, and people come in to see me, mammy and me and all that. And every person would come in, every woman, particularly in the estate, would come in, and she would hand me mammy a holy medal. And I used to go, oh my God, because they wouldn't be out the door 5 minutes, that holy medal would be pinned in my vest. And she used to bring me in and stand me beside the kitchen sink. And she used to lift every holy medal. This is bedtime, and you rub the holy medal, make the sign of the cross of the holy medal on my eyes. And then she would get out the Lourdes water, and she'd rub that in my eyes. Then the Dunwell water, then the Knock water, then the St. Anne's oil. Somebody said I was lucky I didn't drown. But my mammy's prayers were that I would get my eyesight back. Well, you know and I know I didn't get my eyesight back, but I got a hell of a lot more. And I think my mammy's prayers were answered in many ways. And, you know, I always say, you can take away somebody's eyesight, but you can't take away their vision. And my vision is the work that I'm doing with children in Crossfire. And I think we can't ignore the vision of this event today. So thanks very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.